We're going to be talking right now about US journalist Evan Gershkovich. He was employed by the Wall Street Journal and therefore is actually part of the news core group, which also owns Talk, which is why we particularly are concerned in this building about him. Often when you walk into the building, you will see huge big pictures of Evan Gershkovich, who has been held captive since March 2023 by the Russian authorities on trumped-up charges of basically spying, of gathering secret information. Well, today he starts a trial. It's a closed trial. We will not be able to show footage from that trial. However, he has been spotted for the first time in a very long time, shaved head in a sort of glass cage, effectively awaiting that trial. Well, let's talk about it now with Mark Sabah. He's an international affairs consultant and joins us now. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It is interesting, actually. I mean, this case, I think a lot of people will have heard of his name. They might not have heard of him beforehand. But tell us what Mark, what Evan Gershkovich was doing in Russia ahead of these charges being brought against him.
So Evan Gershkovich is an American journalist who worked for the Wall Street Journal. He speaks fluent Russian. His parents moved to America from Russia, and he felt that he was going to go back and report on what was going on in Russia in the modern era. And he switched to the Wall Street Journal just around the time of the war with Ukraine. And he went to report on the Russian military complex. He was then arrested and accused of being a spy, being paid by the CIA to collect information, and thrown in prison. He's been in prison already for more than a year, and his trial has just started. Yeah. And he's one of, he's not the first person that President Putin has arrested and then used as a bargaining chip. Yeah. It's part of President Putin's, whole modus operandi. And we know that when the American basketball player Brittany Griner was arrested, they swapped her for Victor Bout, who is known as the god of war, the Russian arms dealer. Yeah. And so President Putin is making no secret of the fact that he's looking to trade Evan Gershkovich, and he's going to make sure that it's a really good trade. Yeah.
And effectively, again, he's like, he's a prisoner, but he's really a hostage. These are trumped-up charges. He was working as a journalist. We've seen this, brought against British citizens as well. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in Iran. This is kind of an authoritarian government sort of modus operandi, isn't it? And we know Vladimir Putin has an awful lot of form in terms of who he will imprison. We've seen with opposition leaders and journalists in Russia repeatedly. He has done this. There are lots of concerns about Evan's health. I mean, not just physical health, but mental health in the state that he's in, and authorities' access to him, particularly for this trial where he was taken away from Moscow and taken to Yekaterinburg, many miles away, and the trial is going to happen behind closed doors. And let's face it, they don't have a justice system that we would recognise.
Well, I would not call it behind closed doors. I'd call it secret, because they know that they have no evidence of him being a CIA spy. And this is not a trial trying to find truth. This is a trial where we already know he's going to be found guilty. Yeah. He has to be found guilty. The verdict is going to come from on high, not from a jury or from a judge who's read through pages and pages of research and so on. And ultimately, he's a bargaining chip. But exactly as you said, authoritarian governments do this increasingly all over the place. Yeah. And there is a British citizen in a Russian prison called Vladimir Putin. He's being held as well for exactly the same reasons. In Hong Kong, we have a British citizen called Jimmy Lai. He's being held, and he was a newspaper owner. So there is form with these dictators that you arrest journalists who cover pro-democracy or free issues, and you immediately arrest them and use them as bargaining chips. Yeah.
Now, in terms of what's going to happen in the end, okay, he's going to get convicted. He'll be sentenced to probably, hard labour, and we know what's happened to opposition leaders and journalists before. The question is then, if and when he does come out, he's a young man. He's got his whole life ahead of him. There will be a deal done, do you think? It is expected there will be a deal done because Vladimir Putin wants him for a deal. Who is going to be making that deal? Will it be the American authorities? Because this is very different from, say, paying a ragtag group of terrorists who've taken someone hostage. And we know there are countries that do pay for hostages back. France, renowned for paying for hostages. We're always told by the Americans, the Brits, we don't negotiate with terrorists. This is kind of almost like a hostage-taking terrorist act, isn't it? But there will be negotiations going on behind the scenes, won't there?
So there definitely are. We know that there are. We know that the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs in the US is working on this. but there are lots of strings attached. There's another American in prison at the moment, Paul Whelan. They have to deal with him. He's been there even longer than Evan Gershkovich. And also, we don't know what President Putin is asking for in return for the release of Evan. And again, it's important to call him a hostage. He's not a prisoner, he's a hostage. We don't know what the bargain is. Is it to, allow them to keep parts of Ukraine? Is it to give them a new weapon system? Is it to trade them for Russians who've been detained on terrorism charges? It could be anything with somebody like President Putin. It could be giving him amnesty for life to not charge him for crimes against who knows what. So it's very difficult to know exactly what the bargaining is being done. We know that he doesn't like media coverage of all of this. He made a statement yesterday where he said it has to be done in a calm, professional manner between secret services. So he doesn't like the public eye on these sorts of situations, which makes it more important that we talk about people like Evan.
Absolutely.
And we talk rise in hostage taking.
Absolutely. Really appreciate you joining us, Mark Sabah, International Affairs Consultant. Thank you for that. Let's come back in to talk to Benedict Spence about this. I mean, you've got to be a brave journalist working in Russia or working in Ukraine. We know that. If you're being critical of Vladimir Putin, I'm a no marker. I'm absolutely nobody. But I would not think I would be safe in either Russia actually or China now. Actually, that would be somewhere that would be definitely somewhere that I'd be worried about being near open windows or ever having sushi. Put it that way. Yeah. Evan Gershkovich, brave journalist doing the job that journalists do to give us, the truth about what's going on. I mean, I can't imagine sitting there in a cell facing God knows what time behind bars and being a pawn in this international game of chess.
I have to say, without obviously knowing what's going on in his head, anybody who can see the footage, if you're listening, obviously you can't, you can sort of see the look on his face. It's a sort of a sense of relaxed, almost sort of bemusement, because obviously he understands exactly what's going on, given that he speaks fluent Russian. He knows that this is all trumped-up charges, that he's a pawn in this, and that he's ultimately powerless, because he's somebody who knows the way that the Russian state operates so intimately. He's sort of sat there. It must be very surreal for him, and obviously it's a dreadful situation to be in, but very brave journalists do go to countries like this and they take their lives into their own hands in order for the truth to be out there, because unlike countries like Russia, it is not all about propaganda. Actually, private organisations like the Wall Street Journal, they operate in order to sell the news to people so that people have access to all the facts and all the information that they can. We are very privileged to have that, and it's dreadful that this has happened to Mr. Gershkovich and that he has become a victim and a pawn in this wider geopolitical game. I must also say very quickly, though, the fact that the United States were prepared to trade a female basketball player for a warlord, I think shows you that Mr. Gershkovich is in a very difficult situation, because they will be thinking, well, we got that for a basketball.
Yeah, exactly. But again, that's where you're into the pressure. I know people, when people had been hostages taken or prisoners in this circumstance, families are often told, don't make a fuss, get it quiet, let the Foreign Office deal with it. Day one, go public, get the public on your side, get the fuss, and then you'll get the action. That would be my top tip. That's always my plan, as and when. Also, know a few people who are really good at getting you out of countries. I know a few of those as well. Keep them on side. It's a terrible story. Evan Gershkovich, absolutely hero, doing a very, very difficult job in very difficult circumstances, and now facing possibly life imprisonment for his sins.